The snow didn't fall on Christmas Eve. It choked the world. Outside Angela's window, the suburban street of Oak Creek had been erased by a white static void. The wind howled through the eaves of the old Victorian house, a sound like a high-pitched keening that made the glass rattle in its frames. Angela sat huddled on her bed, a heavy wool blanket draped over her shoulders. She was 24, far too old to be afraid of the dark, yet the silence of the house felt heavy, almost predatory. Her parents were stuck 3 towns over, their car claimed by a snowdrift, and her brother was halfway across the country. She was alone with the Christmas tree downstairs and the shadows it cast. To ward off the unease, she had left the door to her bedroom cracked open. The hallway was bathed in the rhythmic pulsing of the multicolored lights from the tree in the foyer. Red, green, blue, total darkness. Red, green, blue, total darkness. She was just beginning to drift into a shallow, uneasy sleep when she heard it. It wasn't a bang. It wasn't the house settling. It was the distinct, unmistakable sound of ceramic sliding across granite. It had come from the kitchen, directly below her room. Angela froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She held her breath, listening so hard her ears began to ring. The sound of a fork hitting a plate. A cold sweat broke out across her neck. She lived alone. The doors were deadbolted. The windows were locked. The security system hadn't chimed. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, but the screen remained black. The battery had succumbed to the cold or a hardware glitch, refusing to wake despite being plugged in. "Hello?" she whispered. The word felt small and pathetic in the vastness of the house. No answer. Only the wind and the rhythmic thrum-thrum of her own blood in her ears. Curiosity, fueled by a desperate need to prove herself wrong, overcame her terror. She grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from her dresser, a meager weapon but something, and crept toward the door. The hallway was a gauntlet of shifting colors. She moved in sync with the lights. Step on the green, pause on the blue, freeze in the dark. She reached the top of the stairs. From here, she could see the edge of the kitchen doorway. The light from the Christmas tree didn't reach that far. The kitchen was a cavern of obsidian. The plate was moving again. It sounded like someone was dragging a feast across the counter. Then, a new sound. The wet rhythmic slapping of something soft hitting the hardwood floor. It sounded like raw meat being dropped. Angela descended the stairs, her bare feet silent on the carpet runners. Every instinct screamed at her to run back to her room, to lock the door and hide under the covers, but she was anchored by a morbid compulsion. She reached the bottom floor. The air down here was significantly colder, biting, freezing, smelling faintly of old pine and something metallic like copper. She rounded the corner into the kitchen. The moon, momentarily breaking through the blizzard clouds, cast a silver spear of light through the bay window. There, on the center of the kitchen island, sat the cookies for Santa plate she had jokingly set out earlier that evening. It had been moved 3 feet from where she'd left it. The 3 gingerbread men she'd baked were gone. In their place sat something gray and translucent, a heap of gristle that shimmered in the moonlight. The plate began to move. Slowly, an inch at a time, it slid toward the edge of the counter. There were no hands touching it. It moved as if the gravity in the room had tilted. Then, a voice drifted up from the floor, beneath the shadow of the island. It was a wet, rattling sound, like someone trying to speak through a throat full of broken glass. Still hungry, Angela's scream died in her throat. A hand, if you could call it that, reached up from the darkness to grab the edge of the counter. It was long, the fingers having too many knuckles, the skin the color of a drowned man's belly. It gripped the granite, and the stone seemed to frost over instantly under its touch. A head rose above the level of the island. It wore a festive red hat, but the fabric was stained a deep, oily black. The face beneath was a ruin of stretched, pale skin. There were no eyes, only 2 weeping hollows that trailed silver liquid down its cheeks. Its mouth was a jagged, horizontal tear, filled with rows of needle-thin teeth. "Angela!" the thing hissed. You didn't leave enough out. The creature hauled itself up. It was impossibly thin, its limbs folding in ways that defied human anatomy. It was dressed in a tattered, filth-caked suit that mimicked a Santa costume, but it hung off its skeletal frame like a funeral shroud. Angela backed away, her legs trembling so violently she nearly collapsed. She hit the Christmas tree. The ornaments shivered and chimed, a mockery of holiday cheer. The creature hopped off the counter with a sickening squelch. It didn't walk. It skittered on all fours, its spine arching toward the ceiling. I have gifts, the nightmare rasped. It reached into a tattered sack it dragged behind it, a sack that was pulsing, moving as if something inside was trying to claw its way out. The thing threw something at her feet. It rolled across the floor, stopping in the glow of the red lights. It was her neighbor's cat, or what was left of it. It had been meticulously unraveled, its fur braided into a crude, bloody bow. Merry Christmas, the creature whispered, its jaw unhinging until it touched its chest. Angela turned and bolted for the stairs. She didn't look back. She could hear the click-clack of those many-knuckled fingers on the wood behind her, gaining ground. She scrambled into her room and slammed the door, throwing the deadbolt just as a massive weight slammed into the other side. The wood groaned, the door frame cracked. Angela! The voice came from the other side, now sounding exactly like her mother. Honey, let us in. It's so cold out here. You're not her, Angela screamed, backing toward the window. The scratching started then. Not on the door, but from above. She looked up. A thin gray finger was poking through the plaster of the ceiling. Then another. The creature wasn't trying to break the door. It was tearing through the house itself. The blizzard outside reached a crescendo, a blast of wind shattering her bedroom window. Shards of glass sprayed inward, and the freezing gale extinguished the hallway lights. In the sudden, absolute darkness, Angela felt a cold, wet hand wrap around her ankle. Found you. The last thing Angela saw before the dark swallowed her was the Cookies for Santa plate, sitting perfectly still on her nightstand, holding a single human finger, topped with a neat, bloody bow. The sleet hit the windshield like handfuls of gravel. Rhea leaned her forehead against the cold glass of the passenger window, watching the neon Christmas lights of downtown blur into long, bleeding streaks of red and green. It was December 23rd. The holiday rush had been a 3-week marathon of double shifts and aggressive customers that had left both her and Andrew hollowed out. Andrew gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He hadn't spoken since they left the office parking lot. The heater in their aging sedan was blowing lukewarm air, barely putting a dent in the winter chill that seemed to have settled into their very marrow. We're almost there, Andrew finally muttered, his voice raspy. Then we sleep for 12 hours. No phones, no tinsel, just silence. Rhea nodded weakly. Silence sounds like heaven. When they pulled into the driveway of their Victorian-era rental, the house looked less like a home and more like a jagged shadow against the gray sky. They had draped a single string of white lights over the porch railing weeks ago. Now, half the bulbs were burnt out, flickering like a dying pulse. Inside, the house was freezing. The air smelled of old wood and the faint, cloying scent of the pine needles dropping from their drying tree in the corner. They dropped their bags in the hallway, the sound echoing too loudly in the high-ceilinged foyer. I'll check the thermostat, Andrew said, trudging toward the kitchen. Rhea wandered into the living room. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with heirlooms and cheap bonds. In the dim light, the shadows of the branches looked like long, skeletal fingers reaching for the ceiling. She felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. Andrew, she called out. It's dead, he shouted back from the hallway. The furnace must have quit. I'll call the landlord in the morning. Let's just get upstairs and huddle under the electric blanket. They climbed the stairs in a daze of exhaustion. The wooden steps groaned under their weight. A familiar sound, yet tonight it felt rhythmic, like the house was breathing with them. As they reached the landing, Rhea stopped. Did you leave the light on in the master bathroom? She asked. Andrew frowned. looking at the sliver of yellow light leaking from under the door at the end of the hall. No, I haven't been up here since 6 this medicine. They stood still. From behind the heavy oak door of the bathroom, a sound drifted out. It was a voice. It wasn't a scream or a sob. It was a low melodic murmur. It sounded like someone reciting a list, or perhaps a prayer, in a rhythmic, chanting cadence. The silk for the throat, the silver for the eyes, the holly for the heart. Rhea's heart hammered against her ribs. Andrew, someone's in there. Andrew's exhaustion vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp adrenaline. He stepped in front of Rhea, his hand searching the hallway for something to use as a weapon. He settled for a heavy brass bookend from the hallway table. "Hey!" Andrew shouted, his voice cracking. "Who's in there? We're calling the police!" The chanting stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse. It was heavy, pressurized, as if the air in the hallway had suddenly become water. Rhea reached out and grabbed the back of Andrew's coat. "Andrew, let's just go. Let's leave," she whispered. "In this weather? We'd freeze," he whispered back. "It's probably just a squatter. Some drunk who found a way in." He took a step toward the door. The floorboard didn't creak. The house was unnaturally still. He reached for the porcelain knob. It was ice cold. "Andrew, don't!" Rhea pleaded. He ignored her, his own fear manifesting as a desperate need to reclaim his space. He turned the knob and flung the door open. The bathroom was filled with steam, though the water wasn't running. The heat was stifling, a wet, tropical warmth that smelled of wet earth and copper. Standing in front of the vanity mirror was a figure. It wore Rhea's favorite red Christmas sweater. The figure's back was to them. It was tall and unnervingly thin. The wool of the sweater stretched tight over a spine that looked like a row of jagged stones. Its hair was long and matted, trailing down its back in greasy clumps. "Rhea?" Andrew gasped, his brain momentarily failing to register that the real Rhea was standing 3 feet behind him. The figure turned. It wasn't a face. It was a mask made of dried orange peels and stitched together leather, with 2 hollow pits for eyes. But it wasn't the mask that made Rhea scream. It was the thing the creature was holding. It held a needle made of a sharpened bird bone and a long strand of tinsel. It had been sewing something into its own neck, bits of broken glass and holly berries, creating a festive, bleeding collar. The creature tilted its head. When it spoke, it used Andrew's voice. "You're home late," it said. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every nuance of Andrew's exhaustion was captured in that stolen tone. "The guest is already in the parlor." The bathroom light flickered and died. Rhea grabbed Andrew's arm and pulled him back. They scrambled down the stairs, their boots thudding against the wood. They didn't look back until they reached the front door. Andrew grabbed the handle and yanked. It wouldn't budge. "The locks," Rhea sobbed, fumbling with the deadbolt. But there were no locks. The door was simply part of the wall now. The wood had grown over the frame, smooth and seamless, as if the exit had never existed. "The windows!" Andrew yelled. He ran to the living room, grabbing a heavy lamp and swinging it at the glass. The lamp bounced off. The glass didn't shatter. It rippled like the surface of a dark pond. Behind them, the Christmas tree began to shake. The ornaments didn't jingle. They clattered like teeth. From within the dark boughs of the dried-out fir, more figures began to uncoil. They were small, gray things with elongated limbs, dressed in scraps of their own clothes. A missing sock, a discarded scarf. One of them crawled out from under the tree, dragging a string of lights. The bulbs weren't glowing with electricity. They were filled with bioluminescent fluid that pulsed in time with Rhea's frantic heartbeat. "It's a nightmare before Christmas," the thing from the bathroom said. It was standing at the top of the stairs now, looking down at them. It had removed its sweater. Its skin was the color of a bruised plum, translucent enough to see the holly berries it had stuffed under its ribs. "We just wanted to sleep," Andrew whimpered, backing into the center of the room. "You will," the creature promised, using Rhea's voice now, soft, comforting, and utterly terrifying. "We need the meat for the feast, the bones for the fire, and the screams. The screams are the carols we sing to the dark." The lights on the tree suddenly flared to a blinding, searing white. Rhea and Andrew huddled together as the walls began to bleed sap, and the scent of pine became so thick It felt like drowning. Outside, the sleet continued to fall on a house that sat perfectly still in the suburbs, its single string of flickering lights finally going dark. Inside, the carols began. They were high, thin, and didn't sound like human voices at all. The kitchen was a sanctuary of cinnamon and clove. Nathan hummed a low, tuneful carol as he basted the turkey, the oven's orange glow casting long, flickering shadows against the linoleum. Outside, the wind howled through the skeletal branches of the oaks, whipping snow against the window panes like skeletal fingers desperate to get in. It was 9 p.m., Christmas Eve. The house was usually full, but this year Nathan was alone, waiting for his brother's family to arrive in the morning. He took pride in the preparation. The table was set with the fine china. The silver was polished until it reflected his tired, happy face. Then, he heard it. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a rhythmic, wet thwack slide. It came from directly above him, from his bedroom. Nathan froze, the baster still dripping juices onto the tray. He held his breath, listening to the house settle. Old floorboards, he told himself. The weight of the snow on the roof. The tap was sharp, like a fingernail clicking against hardwood. It was too deliberate to be the wind. Nathan set the baster down with a trembling hand. His heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked at the kitchen clock. The ticking seemed to have grown louder, mocking his hesitation. He grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the counter. A pathetic shield, but it felt solid. He stepped out of the kitchen and into the hallway. The festive lights he'd strung along the banister flickered. One bulb, a bright red one near the top of the stairs, began to pulse like a dying heart. "Who's there?" he called out. His voice sounded thin, swallowed by the heavy silence of the house. There was no answer, but the sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that precedes a scream. Nathan began to climb. Each step groaned under his weight. As he reached the landing, he noticed a draft. It wasn't just cold, it was freezing, carrying a scent that didn't belong in a home at Christmas. It smelled of stagnant well water and old, wet fur. The door to his bedroom was ajar. A sliver of moonlight cut across the hallway floor, illuminating a trail of dark, glistening droplets. They weren't blood, they were too thick, almost like black oil. He pushed the door open. The room was in shambles. His carefully made bed had been stripped, the sheets dragged into a pile in the center of the room. The window was wide open, curtains lashing in the freezing gale. But it was the wardrobe that caught his eye. The heavy oak doors were vibrating. Nathan approached the wardrobe, his knuckles white around the skillet's handle. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cold wood. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, he flung the doors wide. There was no one inside, only his suits swaying gently. He exhaled a long, shaky breath, a nervous laugh bubbling up in his throat. "Just the wind," he whispered. "Just the damn wind." He turned to close the window, but as he moved, he caught his reflection in the vanity mirror. Behind him, in the pile of stripped bedsheets, something moved. A long gray limb, too thin to be human, with too many joints, unfolded from the fabric. It was topped with a hand that ended in jagged, yellowed needles. The thing didn't have a face in the traditional sense. Where eyes should have been, there were only deep, weeping pits. Its mouth was a vertical slit that ran down its neck, lined with rows of needle-thin teeth that vibrated with a low, wet hum. Nathan tried to scream, but the air in the room had turned to ice in his lungs. The creature didn't lung. It moved with that horrific thwack slide motion, its body unfolding like a rusted folding chair. It was wearing something, a tattered, filth-stained red coat. It must have scavenged from the attic's holiday bins. It tilted its head, the pits of its eyes fixed on Nathan. It reached out a spindly hand and, with a terrifyingly delicate motion, touched the bell on Nathan's bedside table. The creature's vertical mouth split open, emitting a sound that mimicked Nathan's own voice from earlier that evening. "I'm preparing food for Christmas Eve," the thing hissed. The pitch perfect, but the cadence utterly wrong. But the meat is still so cold. The creature lunged, not with a roar, but with a festive melodic chime that rang out through the silent house. Downstairs, the oven timer went off with a cheerful ding. The turkey was ready. But as the snow piled up against the windows, burying the house in a shroud of white, there was no one left to eat it. Only a wet, dragging sound echoed through the halls, punctuated by the occasional sharp tap of a fingernail against the silver.